I am going to share uh, some parts of a conversation that I had with my mother a few hours ago um, when I was asked by text message what I made of the entire Harry Meghan um, issue. Um, Now, I replied to my mother, and I thought perhaps that I should share what I said to her, because I think that it could be a useful teaching lesson. Now, I should say this before I start. It doesn't matter what camp you support, whether you support Team Windsor or whether you support Team Harry. It really doesn't matter. The reason it doesn't matter is because we have two people or two groups on both sides of the table. It's not about winning, and it's not about being right. It would be naive of myself or anyone not to understand that even a broken clock is correct twice in a 24-hour period. There is something to perhaps learn from either side, but we cannot compare the sins, the evil, the hurt, the blessings from both sides. We cannot put two of the opposing views on the table and critique both sides. The reason is a simple one. Only one side is speaking. Team Windsor will not retaliate or rebut or come out and make a public statement, because that's how Team Windsor have always behaved. The royal family have a decorum to how they communicate on both private matters and public matters. And what that means is that we only have Team Harry's side. So, even if I were to give the devil his due, there is still an overarching position that one must take. And that was what I communicated to my mother. At the end of the day, the attacking, the revelations, the interviews, the publications will come to its useful conclusion. Things have a natural way of self-exhausting themselves. Team Harry have a momentum. The adrenaline that is fueling their passion, good, bad, or indifferent, will exhaust itself. And here is the question that most people have not considered. The question in economics that I've always found to be fascinating, whenever someone comes up with a theory, a supposition, a conjecture, a proclamation, perhaps even a prediction, the question I always ask is as follows: and then what? And then what? In other words, something has to come next. The question to Harry, who is the person I will speak to in this matter, firstly as the leader, but also as the one who seems to have a connection with both sides. The question I have for Harry is, and then what? At the end of the interviews and the books and the podcasts and the proclamations and the audios, and then what? What I want to do is share what I said to my mother. This is not a prediction, but I said that Harry unfortunately has one of two fates. The first is actually the fate of Judas. The second is the fate of the prodigal son. The journey between where he is and where he will end could be a long one. It might be a painful one. It might be unnecessary, but unfortunately it will occur. Now, for my selfish reasons, I do not want to speak to the events that may have taken place or may not have taken place. I find those slightly boring, to be very honest. I want to talk about two things before I talk about the fates. Number one, let's assume that Harry and his spouse, and his certainly not his family, but let's assume Harry and his spouse perhaps were not given the same favourable treatment by the family as he believes he deserves. In other words, let's assume that he was dishonoured. Well, there is a typical way of doing things. There is a manner to behave in private and a manner to behave in public. Now, we are given a formula that always works. If you go into a house, a place, a location, a geography, and you are dishonoured, you are advised to leave peacefully, especially if you arrive in good faith. But you are advised to leave peacefully. But as you leave, to shake the dust off your feet as you leave. In other words, take your honour to another place, to another home, to another location, to another family, to another destination. But as you leave, shake the dust off your feet. Don't take the dishonour with you. Now, Harry failed in the first regard. He took the dishonour with him as he left. Now, the second thing I have that I should say is, as a son of the soil, the one thing you do not do is show dishonour to your land. It doesn't matter what may have happened. You may be unhappy with the cards that you were dealt. You may have an issue with the heavens. You're advised not to shake your hands towards the heavens, and more importantly, not to curse the ground from which you were birthed. If Harry had taken his spouse and his family and moved, in this instance, to one of the four nations in the United Kingdom, I was going to say in Great Britain, but Great Britain only contains 3 nations. But let's just expand it to the 4 nations of the United Kingdom. Harry had a choice. He could have left Buckingham Palace, Kensington Palace, the Windsor Estates, and he could have moved to England, or any part of England, to Wales, or any part of Wales, to Scotland, any part of Scotland, or to Northern Ireland. And he would have remained on the land within the British Isles. Now, he could have even moved to any of the other smaller islands that make up the British territory. In that case, what he would have been doing would have been as follows. He would have been saying, I have been dishonoured in my family, but I still bless the land from which and from whence I have come. In other words, he would have had the blessing that flows through the soil that he calls home. By exiting, by leaving the shores or the island of Great Britain, he did two things. Firstly, he said, I reject my family. And number two, I reject my land and its people. Big mistake. I was raised in a different way to most people. And most people were raised in a different way to me. But there's something I've always held close to heart, which is honor your father and your mother so that your days may be long in whatever land that you have been given. That is a divine law. It's a natural law. And it's a law that works even within the confines of the human experience. If you have a father that is dishonoring to you and to your family, the requirement to show honor increases. It doesn't decrease. Now this brings me to number 3. Harry has painted the picture that he was dishonored. And his approach is to dishonor his family through the revelations, through the interviews, through the books that he intends to write, and all the other publications he will be paid to provide. Number 4, if the sins that were committed against him and his spouse were so great, there's one way to show that his revelations were coming from a great place and a pure place, and that would have been to have spoken from his heart without compensation. Now I know that there is a gray area to why he has, or they have chosen, to be compensated. I understand that. But there is something powerful that is saying, I'm not selling my stories to the highest bidder, which is the way it appears. Now this brings me to the 2 fates that I mentioned at the start. The books of antiquities tells us about 2 fascinating stories that most people are familiar with. The first is Judas. The second is the prodigal son. I'm going to begin with the second, with the latter. The prodigal son is a story that we've all heard. I say we, but I understand most people may not have heard the story, but in a nutshell, the son is born into a family. Now he's not the heir to the throne. He has an older brother, and therefore his older brother will be the heir to the throne. His elder brother is hardworking, dedicated to the father and the estate. And he says to himself, well, Father, I'd like you to give me what is rightfully mine. Split the kingdom and give me what is mine, and let me take what is mine and let me seek pastures that are new. The father pleads with him, and he says, I have made up my mind. I want to go. The father gives him, after much attempts to convince him to stay, and to convince him that the sum of the parts are not necessarily greater than the whole, that staying together as a family is much better than separated. Nonetheless, the father says, here is your portion of your inheritance, but also here is your blessing. The father sends him away with his blessings. Unwise as the young man is, he goes to another land. He meets new people. He has parties. He's celebrated initially because he has something novel, a background, a story, money, power, fame, influence. And after many years, he spends all of his inheritance. And for some sad reason, he ends up unable to feed himself. And here is perhaps where the journey of Harry's possible future could begin. Now, I don't believe that Harry and his family will ever get to the point of having nothing. But I do believe, like the prodigal son, that at some point in the future, his conscience, the voice within, will say, perhaps you did wrong. And there will be guilt. The prodigal son, and the story says that he came to himself and he said, well, here I am struggling in a new land, in a foreign land, unable to feed myself. Whereas in my father's house, my father's servants are living much better than I am in a foreign land. They have much to eat and a roof over their heads. So I will get up and I will journey back to my father, and I will say to my father, forgive me. Forgive my sins, and let me be your servant. Now understand the power of the conversation. Let me be your servant. Let me serve you. Now he comes to himself and he journeys, and according to the story, for some reason, the father always had faith, which I think is the case in the Windsor family. Now, it might play out slightly differently, but a father's love always remains. This is something most people cannot understand. If you are a father, the love always remains. No matter the amount of dishonor a daughter or son pays to you, the love remains. There's always room for forgiveness. The prodigal son, while still far away from the father's house, is recognized by the father. The father runs, embraces his son, kisses him, not remembering or making any reference to all the hurt and all the, you might say, pain caused. The son says, please, can I serve you as a servant? The father puts back a ring on his fingers, kills the fattened cow, and celebrates the return of his son, who he felt was dead. Dead both emotionally to the family and dead physically and spiritually. The return of the son was celebrated. That is the first fate. If Harry can come to his senses, and if he's willing to journey back to the motherland, where we await reconciliation, is possible. But the first thing he has to do is admit that he was wrong. He has to apologize in private, but also apologize in public. Not to the family publicly, but to the land, to the people. So many accusations and claims have been made. So many inferences have been left unaddressed, so much so that the entire world have come to think of Great Britain as a country full of racists. Now I can say this with commitment and with conviction. This is a very special country. I have never had an incident of racism or its kind. For some reason, I've always found favor wherever I go and with whomever I meet. I always go out in good faith, peaceably, looking for opportunities to work with and help other people, and I get whatever I put out. We are what we attract. This is an amazing country. It has great people. I have the fortune of saying that I have lived in all of the three of the nations of Great Britain: England, Wales, and Scotland. Amazing people, irrespective of whatever nation or land that they may occupy. Great people. Um, this is a great country with good people. And the picture that is being painted that this is a racist country is false. This does not mean that there aren't people around the fringe areas that perhaps are tribal in their beliefs. I haven't experienced that. And to those who have, I'm not robbing you of your experience. I'm saying the majority of the people are good people. The majority are kind people, loving people. Now, what I find interesting, and I should say this, although this is not part of the interaction, across the four nations of the United Kingdom, the Northern Irish, Scots, Welsh, and English, there is so much tribal stereotyping that still occurs today. The Welsh cannot stand English. The Scots cannot stand English. The Northern Irish may stand English because of their issues in Ireland. But what you find is that there's so much history. One nation with four sub-nations that have preferences. If you live in Scotland, you certainly understand what I am saying. If you live in Wales or have lived, again, you would relate to my conversation. Now, the point of the matter is that there are people along the fringe, at the margins, that perhaps have racist tendencies. They're statistically insignificant. You know, we have almost 69 million people in the country, and I have to say the number of people who I would identify as potentially having such tendencies are so little that to paint the entire nation as being possible or possibly all racists by virtue of what we call the hierarchy or the head, which is the monarchy, is a sin that Harry has committed to the land. Now, it's a sin simply means to miss the mark. It's a word from the Aramaic language. This simply says you've missed the mark. In archery, if you take a shoot and you miss, it's called to have sinned. You've one sin, two sin. So when I use the word sin, I'm simply saying Harry has missed the mark of the son of a land and what a son of a land should do. You don't curse the land. You bless the land, even with its imperfections. The second fate comes from the story of Judas. Judas was one of the 12 disciples, according to the Christian faith. He was the disciple that betrayed his master for 30 pieces of silver, I think, if memory serves me well. The story of Judas is fascinating for a number of reasons. It reminds all of us that if you sell out, especially if you sell out the closest people or members of your family, if you sell out to money, if you exchange the love you once had, the integrity that you once had, in exchange for something that is fleeting, you often end up in a place emotionally, spiritually, and physically that is similar to being in a wilderness, an empty place, where there is no happiness, there is confusion, there is anxiety, there is fear. Unfortunately, if you do not come to your senses, the fate that awaits you is often very dark. Now, Judas was given the money, and when he had the money that he so craved, and when his master was taken away, he realized that the fulfillment he thought he would get from being wealthy, from having all this money, from being independent of the master, was nowhere to be found. So he asked if he could give the money back. He offered to give the money back, and he was rejected. A deal is a deal. You signed the contract, the Netflix contract. You signed the contract for all of the TV shows. You signed the book contract. You've given your words. You can't have your words back. It's been published. Judas regretted his decision. Now, here is what separates Judas from the prodigal son. And if I may, I might include or interject and provide a third counter-narrative to the Judas story, if I may. But before I do that, let me finish. The one thing Judas failed to do, certainly like the prodigal son, he had regret. The first emotion, as I said to my mother, would be regret. His conscience will come at some point and haunt him. Now, let me digress. Many years ago, I had a friend, and he said something very profound to me. I was still very young, and I would say he was, I think he was more advanced at the time in thinking. And he said to me, in a conversation that we had with a third party, where some news was provided to the third party, but the news was rejected at face value, he said, let him be. At his quiet time, he will reason. In other words, the information will come into his consciousness. Right now, it's being rejected. At some point, his conscience will come and bring that information down so that he can see the information in more of a peaceful state. Judas regretted his decision. He offered to restore his position by returning the money. He wasn't successful, and this is where he failed. He couldn't live with the guilt, and so he hung himself. Now, I'm not wishing, and I do not wish, the same fate for Harry. What I do know is that Harry sold out. He did. He sold out his family. He sold out the army. He sold out the people. He may not be a British subject like the rest of us. By virtue of being part of the royal family, he is part of the royal family, always will be. But he sold out. He sold his birthright for whatever reason. He will not be returning the money back. But here is perhaps where I think some careful consideration is needed. I bring in the third contrast, the story of Peter. Now, Peter was the second disciple of Jesus. On the same night that Jesus was taken away, according to the storyteller, prior to the arrest of Jesus, Peter prophesies, he says to Jesus that he will be with and by the side of Jesus, even if things go awry. And Jesus says to him, I'll make you a promise. Tonight, before the cock crows 3 times, you, Peter, you will deny me 3 times. powerful statement. Now, Peter could not understand how he could deny his master, someone he loved. Before the cock crows, you, Peter, will deny me 3 times. Upon the arrest of Jesus, Peter denies Christ 3 times. Now, if you juxtapose Judas and Peter, you can say that both of them denied their master. One sold the master and the other denied the master 3 times in one night. But there was a huge difference. Peter went away after the cock crowed. He went away in shame, recognizing that the master had said to him, "This is your fate. You will deny me 3 times before the cock crows." And that happened. He went away with remorse, guilt, disappointed. But here is the difference. Judas went away and hung himself. Peter came forward, having forgiven himself, but recognizing that his master was no longer alive, but decided to take the gospel forward. So he forgave himself and came back like a prodigal son. The story of Peter is similar to the story of the prodigal son. You have to come to your awareness and recognition of your sins, your mistakes, your errors, and you must seek reconciliation. Peter reconciled, and this was the same Peter who stood and preached the gospel as though he had never betrayed his master. The ability to forgive yourself, and this is perhaps where I conclude, the ability to forgive yourself is a powerful lesson that we should all have and learn from. Harry has one of 2 fates, that of Judas or that of the prodigal son. Now you can understand why I use the prodigal son at the start rather than Peter. Peter is simply an example of the prodigal son's journey. We all make mistakes. My hope and my sincere prayer is that at some point, hopefully, before it is too late and before he is consumed by guilt and sadness, recognizing that Harry has a very fragile emotional experience. He is in a very fragile emotional state. And I hate to say this, Harry has not been helped by the choices that he has made with regards to the people he surrounded himself with. Close circle of friends or otherwise. I would hope that Harry's fate is that of the prodigal son. Now, it's entirely up to Harry to decide how the story ends. You know, it hasn't been written. At any day, Harry can wake up and recognize that he's already paid once. He doesn't have to pay twice. The suffering has been paid for. By breaking away from your family and your country and your loved ones and the nation, that is suffering in itself. You have already paid once. You don't have to pay twice. All that is needed is just to stop, recognize perhaps the errors of your ways, if you see it that way, and make the attempt, firstly in private, with your conscience, and secondly, in public. You have to apologize to the family privately, and you have to apologize to the nation publicly. And number 3, and most importantly, you have to demonstrate that apology by returning back to the land. A blessing is something that goes with you and through you. A curse is just the opposite. Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land that you have been given. In this particular case, you've rejected the land. You've dishonored your father and your mother based on hierarchy. Now, the queen consort is his mother, his stepmother. In terms of the hierarchy of command, she is his mother. And he's shown so much dishonor. But all of that can stop. All of that can change through forgiveness. He has to forgive himself first. And he has to be willing to forgive other people, even those who may have hurt him and his family. And he has to begin the process of reconciliation. Now, guilt is a dangerous enemy. Sometimes it creeps up on you before you understand what is happening, and sometimes the pain can be unbearable, and people make decisions that perhaps, like Judas, were unnecessary. Now, I hope that has been useful, but it'll be wrong of me to end today's session by simply talking about Harry. Let me bring this as a question to you, and leave you with 2 or 3 suggestions. Think about your family, your life, and your land. It's very normal to look at other people and critique other people. I would like you, number 1, to look at your family, your words, your emotions, your land, and your people, and identify whether there are parts of your life where some reconciliation perhaps is needed. And here is my final word. Don't wait for the other side to reach out first. There is no shame in being the first person to reach out. Time is such a unique gift we all have been given, but we do not know how much time we have. Before the sand runs out of the hourglass, reach out and find peace.